Hello and welcome back, USD, to your favorite sports talk radio show, Bix and K. As always, he's K, I'm Bix, and we will be here with you from 2:30 to 4. You can listen to us on uofsdmedia.com or through my Facebook live feed, K's Facebook live feed, K's Periscope.
No Instagram today.
I believe that's all we've got
That's
today.
right. But we're still rolling big, and I finally can hear in my headphones, so
There we go.
there.
That's always a plus.
It is.
Anyway, diving right into things here, Kay. What's on everybody's mind? The NBA playoffs, specifically Cavs and Warriors, both starting off this postseason 8-0, something that's never happened before in the NBA.
That's right. So not only do we have the Warriors playing really good basketball on the western side of the ball, their biggest advantage probably is that the Houston Rockets and the San Antonio Spurs, which we'll get to in a minute, are playing their heart out in Texas, so they're going to have an easier route going forward, and now the Warriors get to rest. Now, on the other side, on the Eastern Conference, we're seeing a very similar thing happening with the Cleveland Cavaliers.
This series is exactly in the same spot at 2-2.
It is, and a very similar situation because you have the 2 and 3 seeds the 4 and 2 seeds, something like that. Yeah, the 4 and 1 seed.
4
actually.
and 1.
Yeah, 4 and 1 because I'm just used to Cleveland being number 1. The 4 and 1 seeds battling it out in a pretty evenly matched series. My main takeaways that I want to ask you about: LeBron's playing out of his mind, Kevin Durant also playing out of his mind, and then with the Warriors as a whole, how is Mike Brown's coaching so far? So a lot of things to talk about. Let's start though with Mike Brown's coaching. As we know, Steve Kerr is out pretty much indefinitely.
Yeah, which is too bad because not something that Steve Kerr deserves. It's tough to see him go through things like this, especially as a Warrior fan. But getting to your question about Mike Brown, he is doing all that he can do right now. It's similar to when we had this discussion last year when Kerr was out and Luke Walton stepped in to take the reins for this Warriors team. Yes, he's a good coach, and you basketball fans may remember that just a couple of years ago, Mike Brown was coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yep.
So clearly someone that's qualified, knows what he's doing, is perfectly capable of
He's also coached the Lakers.
coaching this team.
Coached the Lakers, coached a handful of other teams, also coached USD, so that's something to keep in mind.
There you go.
If the Warriors win, then USD gets into the ring.
But I think the Warriors' success at this point can be more attributed almost to the fact that, one, they're playing for their head coach. They're playing for Steve Kerr to do him justice and hopefully give him a little relief from the pain that he's enduring currently. But also, I think this postseason has really, like you said, been a testament to Kevin Durant and how well he's playing.
Yep.
Because if the Warriors don't have Kevin Durant, they probably drop 1 or 2 games.
1 or 2.
At this point, Steph and Clay haven't necessarily been on their game for the better part of these last 2 series, but KD has picked up the slack and he shot the lights out, and that's why the Warriors are in the position that they're in right now.
What's funny is that focusing on the Warriors as a whole, we kind of saw that the Trailblazers were a bigger match for them.
They were absolutely
than the Utah
more
Jazz.
difficult matchup.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest factors of how cleanly the Warriors played against the Jazz is Kevin Durant stepping up. Really feeling comfortable. Obviously, when you're going into the postseason, it's almost an entirely different aspect of how you look at everything that's happening on the court. So Kevin Durant looks acclimated with his teammates. Kind of a hot take here, but Steph, statistically, actually, not playing that well. A hot take, in the intangibles, he just doesn't look that comfortable. But I think the fact that they still got a sweep, he's going to really turn it on again going into the third round and hopefully the finals, because I want to see that matchup. Do you think Steph is affected negatively by Kevin Durant's presence? I mean, I don't think he's that kind of player, but let's hear the Bay Area side of it.
I don't think he's negatively affected. Like you said, I am a little bit biased in this conversation, being a Warriors fan, but really what it comes down to is he doesn't have to put the team completely on his back anymore. Not that he had to do that before, because the Warriors have had playmakers like Clay and Draymond, but this was Steph's show before, and now he's kind of made room for Kevin Durant, and just by virtue of doing that, he's going to take a couple less shots per game. He's going to give some of that up. And on nights where maybe it's not going down for him, it's going to be a little more noticeable because he's not getting as many opportunities.
Well, one thing that I saw that's an interesting topic to talk about right now, and I'm going to ask this question to all of your listeners on Facebook, all of our listeners on UFSD, my Facebook, people are coming in, Periscope, etc. My main question is, if John Wall was on the Golden State Warriors this year, would they still be as good a team? Would they still sweep in the first 2 rounds and still win, I think 60 of their games?
I personally think so. I mean, Steph, I still believe, is clearly head and shoulders above most of the NBA, but with the talent the Warriors have, if you substitute an all-star for another all-star, they're still in this position at the end of the road. But you make a good point. Everyone that's tuning in on either one of our Facebooks or on Periscope, please comment, let us know what you think, your thoughts on the NBA playoffs, or anything else you want us to get to a little bit later in the show, and we will do our best to answer your questions. So at the end of the day, with the Warriors at 8-0, does that surprise you at all? Did you think the Utah series would be a little bit tougher for them?
Well, I think because, the Utah and Clippers series went to 7, I kind of put a little bit more weight on Utah. I thought they would show out at home and at least get 1 win. But this not only shows, it's kind of a double-edged sword, it not only shows how good the Warriors are, it shows how tumultuous and pretty abysmal the LA Clippers were in this postseason. My thing is, I really hope that Utah just continues to improve. I mean, they're a young team. I think they're definitely going to improve. And the reason for that is, they're never going to get free agents to sign with them. They're not going to go play in Salt Lake City. But I expected them to win 1. But I'm still not surprised that the Golden State Warriors just completely swept. And they did so in a very interesting fashion. I think they were winning. They won almost every game by double-digit points.
Yeah, they weren't just winning games, they were blowing out the Jazz.
And an interesting statistic is that 16 of the last 17 games, I think in the second round, have all been victories for the team that has won. Sorry, let me rephrase. 16 of the last 17 games in the second round have all been won by double-digit deficits. I mean, that's kind of... that makes me as a fan kind of sad because I want to tune in for all 4 quarters of the game.
And it just kind of shows you the state of the NBA right now. We've talked about it all season, how basically you have a couple teams at the top. In the West, it's 3 teams. It's the Warriors, Spurs, and Rockets. And in the East, you could almost make the argument that the Cavs are the only team that is on that level of play.
Even though they were the second seed.
Even though they were the second seed, the Celtics you can throw in there because, they're still a very talented team. But, I mean, the Clippers in the West were a 4 seed. And they were abysmal. They were horrible.
Yeah. I think you could make the argument that if the Grizzlies were in that position, they could have maybe beat the Utah Jazz.
It seems like this year we had a couple of those lower seeds look better than some of the mid-range teams maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is.
I mean, you think about it top to bottom, in the Western Conference going into the postseason, it was Golden State, San Antonio, Houston Rockets, all very great teams. But even 4 through 8, LA, which at the time we thought had a fighting chance, Utah, a young, forceful team, kind of like the Bucks on the Eastern Conference, 6, 7, 8, Oklahoma City Thunder has probably the league MVP. A very solid team in the Grizzlies, coached young, great fan base, and then even the 8th seed, right? The 8th seed in the Western Conference was the Portland Trailblazers.
Potential future MVP almost, and Damian Lillard.
Exactly, and you have Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, and a great organization there. It's not like that on the Eastern Conference, so it really shows how good the Warriors are because they have to play Western Conference teams obviously more than they play Eastern Conference teams.
Why do you think something like that happened? Like the situation that you lay out in the West this season, is it just that those maybe 4 or 5 seeds, the Clippers and the Jazz, played better as a team? Because clearly with guys like Russ and Damian Lillard and Mike Conley, the 6, 7, 8 seed had far better players.
Well, yeah. I think you're asking why is it that way. I think it has to do with what the NBA stands for, and that is star power. And so people realize that you can do better in the West because LeBron James is in the East. And I think it's silly for me to say, but it makes sense. So when the Thunder were broken up, Kevin Durant stayed in the West. James Harden stayed in the West. This was already when the Western Conference was really powerful. If you look on the Eastern Conference side, it's run by bad organizations. Chicago right now proving itself to be a bad organization. That's where Dwayne Wade went. He kept in the East, but he wasn't looking to get to the finals. He knew that his boy LeBron was still going to make it there. And then you look at the New York Knicks. Used to be a powerhouse, has Carmelo Anthony. Really bad organization, probably one of the worst in pro sports. So I think it's on the West. We have a fighting chance to at least make it to the top, even though the competition is thick. And on the East, it's just bad run organizations.
Now, before we get into the Cavs a little bit here in the postseason that they've had so far, answer me this.
Yeah.
Where do you think the future is headed for the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference? Because to me, the way it looks like now, we'll get into this in just a minute, the Spurs are no longer going to be the team that they once were. We don't know if the Rockets will have another season like the one that they're having right now. You could make an argument. Harden's in the prime of his career. Oklahoma City is certainly still a long way off. Portland was an 8 seed this year. But you go over to the East, and the Cavs are as strong as ever. The Celtics are on the rise.
Well, you're making my point for me.
We don't know what the Raptors are going to do.
Well, and here's my thing. So it's in any pro sports division. I mean, it's always checks and balances. It's a pendulum that swings, and it's going to get more centrist. And I think the biggest reason for that is, yes, the Spurs are getting weaker, although Pop is always going to find a way to be relevant. But on the Eastern Conference side, the Milwaukee Bucks are a huge, and the Boston Celtics are both huge reasons to even out kind of this dynamic shift in Western versus Eastern. Because if you think about it, next year it's going to be LeBron at the top, right? But it's going to be LeBron at 33, and it's then going to be Boston right beneath him with the youngest prime organization right now, and the Milwaukee Bucks, who are even younger but look to have a bigger ceiling. So I think it's going to swing because, again, as you mentioned, Spurs are going to go down a little bit. I think Houston's still going to stay relevant. I think they've found a winning formula there. And the Thunder are not going to be able to build enough in this free agency. They're going to have to keep building through the draft because, again, it's Oklahoma City. And a lot of people don't want to get in Russell Westbrook's way. So it's going to swing towards the middle, and the reason for that is going to be because of Boston, Milwaukee, and the slight downfall of San Antonio, Oklahoma City, and the like.
All right, so now looking at the Cavs a little bit. We've talked about the Warriors starting 8-0, going over the Cavs. If anything, this was probably the more expected outcome, or at least that was the general consensus heading into the playoffs. A lot of people thought that the Warriors might drop a couple games.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't wind up happening. Not the most surprising thing in the world. But most of us expected the Cavs to be at 8-0 at this point.
Yes, I think because historically how fun that season or that series was against the Raptors last year in the Eastern Conference Finals, I think at least some people expected Toronto to win at least one, maybe two, and the big reason for that.
Let me rephrase that. Maybe they weren't expected to be 8-0 necessarily, but after Game 1, especially Game 2 against the Raptors, we could tell where the series was heading.
The argument can be made for that, but I always say that, Toronto, because of what we saw last year, Toronto has such a great home court advantage because, one, you are playing, in Canada's only team. You are playing in this reinvigorated franchise with Drake being the global ambassador. So I did expect Toronto to win a close one. And I think LeBron actually it seemed like he had budgeted that in because the way historically LeBron's played his series is he'll get that first round victory, so he'll get the initial rest. But he's budgeted in that we're going to lose one, maybe two games in the second round, and then continue, turn on the Jets and then just finish this thing off in the third and in the finals. But I think he was surprisingly happy that they actually swept.
Yeah, I mean, it's all the better for him because
Sure.
he gets that.
I mean, he is old.
That much desired rest.
Every year, he's 1 year older. He's going to go through to his 8th straight finals this year. That's and he's going to be 32. I think he's 32 right now.
It's just interesting at this point because so far there's very little that separates both the Cavs and the Warriors, and you could make an argument that the potential next round will do more to separate their postseason experiences so far. Depending on who the Warriors might get, chances are it may be a better team than whoever the Cavs wind up facing. But it's shaping up to be a postseason where there aren't really many excuses. The Warriors, for the most part, barring Steve Kerr not being around, which is still a big deal, are, at least with their players, relatively healthy.
Yeah.
Same thing over with the Cavs. They've played the same amount of games so far. They'll probably have the same amount of rest going into this next series. And this is where we're going to start to see things maybe differ a little bit. But still, this is the most even it's been, I think, in any of the 3 postseasons. Well, 2 that they've met in the finals and potentially 3 with this year.
Sure. I think you're right. There's no excuses for either team. Even more so, I would say, for Cleveland because, they do have their head coach, even though Tyronn Lue is sort of a placeholder for LeBron being the head coach. But both healthy. On the Cleveland side of things, you have, obviously, LeBron. You have Kevin Love is healthy, which, he hasn't been able to stay healthy in the postseason for quite a while. Kyrie as well playing really well actually, and this rest for both teams is just going to make those probably 6 or 7 games in the finals that much more fun. I would argue that it's probably going to be the highest rated. I think I said this on the show a couple weeks ago because of all these factors playing in, and barring that they get to the finals, both these teams, it's going to be the highest rated finals ever. I mean, people are just expecting this. It's the trilogy. I mean, it's the final, probably the final installment in the saga.
Now, let me ask you this, as we will in a minute get into our predictions for the 2 series that are still going on before the conference championships. Who do you think will pose a bigger problem for either the Warriors or the Cavs? How do you see these next series playing out? So I guess you can give us your predictions now.
Yeah.
Who you think each team is going to face?
Well, actually, I'll hold off on my prediction. I'm going to actually say that Houston is going to be the bigger problem. I'm not sure yet if they get there or not. I'll reveal that in a couple minutes. But Houston's going to be the bigger problem because you have a new point guard for Houston. You have James Harden. He had not played point guard before. He was playing the shooting guard position. He can distribute really well under D'Antoni's system. And they have the most underrated shooting in the league. I mean, Eric Gordon can stroke. He won the three-point contest this year. James Harden, no question, can stroke. The biggest thing for Houston probably against them is that they don't have Nene, and they need bigs against a team like...
Out for the rest of the playoffs.
Out for the rest of the playoffs. They need bigs against a team like the Golden State Warriors, especially with Kevin Durant in there. So I would say that Houston's a bigger problem for the Western Conference against the Warriors. On the other side of the ball, I would stick with the Boston Celtics. I think the Celtics are well coached. Scott Brooks is not up to par against LeBron and his entourage. I would say that the Celtics are more complete, and we might talk about this a little later in the show, but Kelly Olynyk, a lot of people don't know who he is, but he's obviously creating some sort of case for himself as a passionate player. He got into a little tuffle with Kelly Oubre, the battle of the Kellys, so to speak. So if you have a guy like Kelly Olynyk with Isaiah Thomas, with Al Horford, Brad Stevens is their biggest asset, Boston's a bigger problem for them. So let's hear your picks now, and let's see if it matches up with mine.
All right, so over in the East, I'm going to go with Boston. I think they find a way to get it done. Now, it may take 7 games the way this series is going. I think both of these series potentially have a great chance to go to a Game 7. But I'm going to stick with the Celtics. They've already shown that they can overcome adversity already in this postseason, and I think they find a way to do it behind Isaiah Thomas and some inspired play. And then over in the West, this was a little more difficult for me to grapple with. I think it also in all likelihood goes to 7.
Okay.
I think the Spurs
And
are
that's good news for both the Warriors and the Cavs.
are not going down without a fight, but I think I'm going to go with Houston.
Okay.
Now, it's hard because we've been on the Spurs, I don't want to say bandwagon all season, saying that they were going to be the unquestioned number 2 and kind of jumping ship now. So it don't look as great if they actually win. But I'm going to say Houston gets it done.
And I think, if I'm
James Harden's got a lot to prove.
He does. And I'm going to agree with you. And the reason I'm going to agree with you is because, well, one, Tony Parker's out. And I think that's a big blow against them. Because
to the Spurs, that is.
To the Spurs, right. And that's a big deal because, Tony Parker is playing the point, or was playing the point, and now you have James Harden sort of uncontested. I can't remember who their backup. I think it's Patty Mills, but he's just not going to get it done against, an all-star in James Harden in the prime of his career. So I'm actually going to have to agree with you that I think Houston takes it, and the only way they're going to do that is if they get if they play a really good game back in San Antonio. I believe it's tonight or tomorrow.
It's tonight, indeed.
If San Antonio takes this one home, it's going to be. If they take Game 5, I think it's going to be really hard for the Rockets to win it. But of course, if Houston finds a way to win tonight, I think San Antonio's favored by 6 points.
Favored by 5 at this
points.
point, according
Okay, so
to
it
the
went
front
down.
page of ESPN.
Okay, so it went down. If they can win it tonight, they can definitely lock it up back in Houston. Another thing to keep in mind is that Houston and San Antonio not that far away from each other, so no travel fatigue or anything like that. So let's review our picks and let's see if anybody out there agrees or disagrees.
Yeah, let us know what you guys think, who you think is going to win in the rest of this round, and then conference championships and beyond.
Yeah, so you have the Warriors and the Rockets, as do I. And on the other side of the ball, you have the Cavs and the Boston Celtics. I have to agree with you there. I think what the NBA playoffs usually show us is that the best teams always go to the third round. And then from there, it's almost sometimes a crapshoot. So, yeah, it'll be a fun third round. I hope it ends up that way. And, again, going to 6 or 7 for either of these series is just good news for the Warriors and the Cavs.
It really is. Gives them more time to rest, and that way they'll be all the more ready to go for their conference championship series. I really don't see a world in which either of those series potentially gets past 6 games. 6 games even would be pretty good for the losing side to make it that far.
In the third round for either team, yeah.
Yeah, for either team. I don't see the Rockets or the Celtics winning more than 2 games in their respective series, if those are the 2 teams that make it there, but we'll just have to wait and see.
The key to whoever makes it there, whether it be Houston, San Antonio, or Washington, Boston, the key for them to get a foot up above their opponents is to win one of those first 2 games at the Oracle Arena or at the Quicken Loans Arena. They'd have to win one of those 2 games, split that series at home, and then hopefully, in their case, split the series away in order for them to have a fighting chance. I'm excited. What I love about NBA playoffs is that quite literally every single day there's a game on, and every game matters in that sense. So I'm really, really excited to continue the train of the NBA playoffs. I think it's been fun regardless of the double-digit deficits.
It has, absolutely, and it's only going to get more exciting as we get closer and closer to what seems like the inevitable rematch in the NBA Finals between the Cavs and the Warriors.
Absolutely. So before we move on to the NBA, I bring this up with a little bit of caution. I don't want to give this guy too much airtime, but if he insults the GOAT, you kind of got to bring it up. LeVar Ball has come out and said that MJ, I will quote, ain't no Lonzo Ball. And this is in reference to the Ball ZO2s or something like that, dropping for the price of $495. The most expensive basketball shoe ever to be released, I would say, on the open market. What are your initial thoughts on Mr. Ball?
I was hoping it was a joke from
Right.
the beginning, because this just seems like I mean, it doesn't
I mean,
seem...
is he a troll
It is,
or
it
he a
is
moron?
another LeVar Ball PR stunt like we've seen so many times before now.
Is it a stunt? Is he a troll or is he a moron? That's what my biggest question.
It could be a little bit of both.
It's a little bit of both.
I will give you that. But at this point, when is enough enough? I mean, we've heard
frankly,
a lot. We've heard a lot of talk so far, and yeah, okay, LeVar says some controversial things, but that's easier to brush off. But when you actually invest in making a real product, a basketball shoe that you're going to sell to the public, and you overprice it so ridiculously.
He doesn't have a team yet.
Not only does he not have a team yet, he's not in the NBA yet.
Not in the NBA.
He hasn't been drafted yet.
And I think this is going to hurt his draft stock. Well, listen, you asked, when is this whole thing going to, what's going on? When is it going to end? It's a joke. Ross P is tuning in. Ball's a joke. I think they're serious, not trolling in their mind. That's really interesting. So you're saying he's a full moron. And I have to agree with you there. One thing I want to say is that I think the moment it ends is when we, even though we're the smallest microcosm of the sports media, when ESPN, Fox, FS1 stop talking about this. And I think even though we're talking about this right now, I want to make it a point to talk about sports media as a whole, because we see that the landscape is changing, where it's clickbait. It's us talking about LeVar Ball. It's us talking about the business side of sports. It's us talking about what's going to make us more infuriated. It happened with, you could argue, for some people, Colin Kaepernick. It's happening with LeVar Ball right now. And it's always happened when, every time we Google search Tom Brady's wife or who is this person dating.
Are you Google searching that a lot?
Well, I know it's Giselle. Come on. But you get what I'm saying. It's sports media is becoming more intrusive and thus entitling the media directors over true journalism. And I know, you have an interest in sports journalism. I'm doing this show. I have an interest in it, but not a professional interest in it. I want to get your thoughts on the ever-changing landscape of sports media and specifically how it relates to someone like LeVar Ball. And I'd love to, invite any of our guests on Facebook or whatever to chime in as well.
Well, the interesting thing about this phenomenon is, excuse me, we talk about it within the frame of sports media, but that's not the only thing it extends to. It extends to media as a whole and the future of journalism as a whole. And, stop me if you've heard this before, when someone who maybe doesn't have the greatest ideas out there, who's being incredibly loud, all of a sudden gets a great platform to say what he wants, and,
Or she.
Or she.
Catch me outside. How about that?
Exactly. And now, here we are. Regardless of whether some of this stuff is valuable or not, we're being fed the things that the media almost thinks we want to hear. And it's all about pitting side A against side B and making the most controversial element or show or subject that you possibly can, which
Right.
has its merit sometimes, maybe, but for the most part, that's not what true journalism is. And it's difficult because it's exciting. It's interesting to watch, but that's not what true journalism is. So, to your point, it's hard to know where going back to sports journalism specifically now, is headed in the future, because we were talking about this pre-show, and when we were younger, this was still somewhat the case, but you knew a lot of your local sports reporters, or even ESPN sports reporters, and it was a job that was
And when we say sports reporters,
more revered than it is today.
one more revered.
Tread
Think of the
carefully.
people that are going to, ask LeBron James a question after a loss in Game 5. Those types of reporters, not the guys who have access to a blog. Go on.
So we're starting to see that recognition and the prestige that job has held for so long begin to fade almost.
Yeah, you make a point, and I think it's a double-edged sword because, one, my my prime example as it relates to our current situation is LeVar Ball. A lot of people, everywhere I go, a lot of people are just tired of him. Yet, everyone still talks about him. Think about last year, ESPN on their main ESPN website, ESPN.com, they had a whole section called, and I'm not joking, they had a whole section called Nothing But Steph, where they would have all Steph Curry highlights, Steph Curry video, and a whole section dedicated to like Aisha Curry, what she's doing on her social media, et cetera,
Which
et cetera.
isn't to say that this isn't interesting and maybe important stuff to a lot of people.
But it is a double-edged sword. We can't just talk about the things we don't like. We have to talk about the things we do like, but it's not relevant to sports journalism.
And you can't let that dominate everything it is that you report. That's more the point.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really important case, and I think I'm not saying, another example is going back to the ever changing landscape of ESPN. I mean, they just let off a multiplicity of personnel. It was a ridiculous amount. Some of our favorite on-air personalities. One of the things I do remember is that they gave a lot of space to Jamel Hill and Michael Smith on SC6, where they were encouraged not to talk about sports that much. It was more about culture, music, movies, and all that. Again, that's a debate that I can't have a solidified stance on because, one, I don't want to just watch highlights or the scores every night because I already know what's happening with my smartphone. But at the same time, if that influences how sports journalism should be revered, if we're giving someone a platform that doesn't deserve it, who didn't go to school for it and knows how to write, that's another problem. We're just going to have to see how it goes, and I think that's why FS1 is doing such a great job right now. I mean, in the ratings and whatnot, because they're giving, they're giving way to people like Clay Travis, who went to school for, he was a litigator. Colin Cowherd, obviously one of the most educated sports personalities right now, knows what he's talking about. And they bring out a plethora of good hosts that know what they're saying. We could talk about the ESPN FS1 debate for a long time, but I don't know. You want to chime in?
And the other thing about this is sports. The sports media business has almost become, and I don't want to overgeneralize for a lot of people, but this idea of being able to be on TV, a lot of people are chasing this fame. Now you have TV personalities that can occasionally write a pretty good column, and they do it from time to time, as opposed to at its birth, at its inception, sports journalism and sports media was columnists who are writing every day. They're digging into really what we're looking to hear about in sports beyond just the final score, that were sometimes, maybe occasionally on TV or in the public eye.
Yeah, and obviously, it has to adapt at some point due to social media and all that, as you mentioned. It can't just be columnists anymore, but there has to be a good balance with it. I did bring this up in terms of talking about Fox, but I want to get your take on that as a whole. Why do you think they've been so successful recently?
Well, like you said, it's a mixture of they've gone out and recruited incredibly good talent, and these guys have had a little more leeway, I would say, to do what they want in terms of creating an interesting show that they're invested in, as opposed to some of their former employers maybe being a little more restrictive. And then also just on the pure sports side of things, they've picked up a lot of games and they've signed contracts with different leagues that offer a lot of unique content. And things like soccer. Fox Sports 1 is the place to go now for the most part. Watching any sort of soccer game.
Soccer, obviously.
Champions League. And
obviously gaining traction here in the U.S. UFC, they went out and invested a lot of money in the UFC. They're going to have the rights to the World Cup in 2018 as well, going back to soccer.
They have NFL games too now.
Fox does, obviously.
Fox does as a whole, but through Fox Sports Go, you can watch NFL games online.
You bring it up, so I'm going to ask you about it. Jay Cutler, the new I believe color commentator, the number 2 color commentator behind Joe Buck and Troy Aikman. He's going to be in the booth with, I think, Charles Davis, who I really like. That's a risky hire for a lot of people who just don't have a strong opinion on a guy like Cutler. I mean, he's Vanderbilt educated, mediocre quarterback at best, not known to have a beautifully bright personality. But I think what we've noted is that Fox knows a lot of things that we don't know. Did they make the right hire here? I mean, does he last?
There's something. There's obviously something there. If Fox has hired him, this may not be a popular opinion, but I think guys like Romo and Cutler deserve a shot to be considered for jobs like this right when they come out of the league. And I'm not saying go put them and replace your top broadcasters with them like they did with Chris Collinsworth and Tony Romo and that
Phil
whole,
Simms, not
Phil Simms. I'm sorry, and Tony Romo and that whole deal. That's a little bit much, but give the guy a shot. Why not? They're knowledgeable. You just said Jay Cutler, Vanderbilt educated, very knowledgeable guy. He's played quarterback in the NFL, regardless of whether he was very good or not. Played quarterback in the NFL. Only 32 people in the entire world can say that they're starters on an NFL team right now. So that's worth something. And he knows what he's talking about. Sometimes the personality comes with being on air, and you're freed up to do what you want and showcase a little bit more about yourself. When you're in the league, maybe you're a little bit more reserved. So do I think he deserves a shot? Yeah.
All right. But do you think he's going to do well? Is it too soon to tell? Is that not our place? That'd be my position.
Unlike Tony Romo, we haven't really ever seen Jay Cutler not necessarily in a similar position, but we haven't heard him speak out as much and be in the public eye as much.
I can't think of one.
Besides when he's been defending himself through the various debacles that have gone on throughout his career.
But even then, I can't think of a single press conference of his.
I'm a little less sure about him. It'll take some time. You can't say right now whether he's going to be good or bad. I think he has a great opportunity to be good. But I'm certainly more confident in Tony Romo's abilities at this point.
Yeah, and, I think we've noted that the NFL on CBS is a very different style than the NFL on Fox. Fox tends to have more of a, I don't know, NFL on CBS seems like, it's the Sunday morning show. It's like very clean, very polished. It's going to be the wardrobe provided by Polo. Whereas the NFL on Fox will have those hot takes. And I think that's why Jay Cutler is an interesting fit for me there. CBS is more bland. Fox is more, they'll go after you. So let's see if the route he goes is where, Jay Cutler is just a total jerk to everyone and maybe calls out his former teammates and takes that route. I think that's the only way he'll find success in the commentator booth. Regardless, it'll be very fun for us to see that because, I had never seen like Dan Fouts play. I had never seen like Phil Simms play, right? But now we've seen guys like Tony Romo and Jay Cutler not only get drafted, play, and now be in the booth. That's like an interesting thing for me, at least.
And bringing this all back to the conversation we were just having about the potential future of sports journalism as a whole, is it's going to, I believe, come back to the special individuals that offer something unique to a landscape that desperately needs a little bit of variety. And we've seen that in guys like Colin Cowherd that have stepped out and done things by themselves and created their own shows, what have you. But why not give a guy like Jay Cutler a shot? Because if it doesn't work out, essentially you kick him to the curb. It didn't work. It happens. But if it does work, maybe you have your next great broadcaster that'll be with you for years to come. And that doesn't just extend to being in the booth calling a game. That goes for all sorts of sports media, from journalism to radio show hosts to TV personalities. So I think that's kind of where we may be headed in the future.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense. It's got to be a hybrid of, okay, we want personalities that'll bring a new perspective, but in a polished, or not polished, but make an argument that is worth hearing, and not just LeVar Ball.
Absolutely. Something with substance.
There you go.
1%.
All right. Well, that was our mini lecture. That was our mini debate. That was our mini dialogue on sports media. I quite enjoyed that. It is 3:10. You are listening to Bix and K Sports Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder, I'm going to take this moment right now to say something kind of sad. This is at least my second to last show ever. Our last show will be next week. Please tune into that. That'll be fun. I think it'll be kind of sad, but we'll do a fun job. I've been so thankful to do this every Monday or Tuesday. Bix, of course, will not be doing it for the rest of the year, but he will come back, from what I assume, in 2018.
Yeah, I'm headed abroad in the fall, which is very exciting, but I will be back in the future. That being said, hopefully we can find something a little special to plan for K's last show next week.
That's right.
So we've sincerely appreciated all of you that have tuned in to our show over the last couple semesters, and hopefully next week we can send K out with a bang.
Yeah, I'm not... I don't know. Do I have to wear a suit?
But we're not done yet here today.
No, we're not.
So continue, ask questions, comment away if you'd like on either of our Facebook feeds. We'd love to give you guys a shout out on the show. But moving on, let's talk a little bit of soccer, Kay.
Yeah, let's do it. I want to start out with the Champions League because we just finished up Juventus versus Monaco. So the road to Cardiff has now been basically completed for Juventus, as they will be in the Champions League final May 20-something on FS1. That'll be fun. Who do you think they're going to be playing, considering it will be either one of the two teams from Madrid?
It's going to be Real.
Okay.
They're up 3-0. It's pretty much a given. I would love to see a comeback for the ages and have Atletico storm back and take it away from the Galacticos, but I think we've had our Leicester City moments in the last couple years.
That's right. We can't.
I don't know that it's in the cards. So that really sets up this Juventus-Real Madrid matchup. And for those of you that weren't able to tune in today, Juventus did go on to beat Monaco 2-1 in the tie today, which made it 4-1 on aggregate. They moved on pretty easily. Interesting point to note, though, Juventus finally gave up a goal after something like 690 minutes.
689 minutes, yeah.
Without conceding.
And it was Mbappe, I believe, who scored. One thing I do want to mention, the main takeaway from that Juventus game is that their defense, that statistic proves it, their defense has been so good, and I think they're going to need that and a little bit more to take on Real Madrid's fiery offense. So focusing on Juventus, you have Buffon in the goal, Chiellini, Bonucci back there in the defense. Even Dani Alves has provided a very big help on the wing side. I mean, they have all the pieces to compete against Madrid. I know we're just assuming that Madrid's going to be in it, but...
Real, that is.
Real, that's right, sorry. Real, when I say Madrid, I meant Real. If I mean Atletico, I'll say Atletico. One thing I want to say is that Juventus has impressed me because, of course, I'm a Barcelona fan. They knocked us out. Juventus has always been on the forefront of world soccer, but especially now, I think, more and more people are still going to take them more and more seriously because when you think of the top 5 teams in world soccer, for me, they wouldn't come up immediately. But the case should be made that they're in there.
Since you bring it up, who are your top 5 teams in world soccer at this point?
Barcelona, Real Madrid. I would go Chelsea. I'd go Bayern Munich. And typically I would go, this is where I would say, I wouldn't say Arsenal, man, I'm sorry. I would argue maybe Man U. I would argue maybe Man City at their peak. But now I would say Juventus. But earlier I wouldn't because it wouldn't come up in my mind. I think that's the weakness of Serie A soccer over the last few years. But the case has to be made and should be made that they are in the top 5.
I do believe that Juventus are firmly in the top 5. I think they are the best team in Europe currently. I'm going to be picking them to win the Champions League final no matter who they face. That being said, interesting point I want to touch on right quick is you mentioned Chelsea and maybe a Man U, a Man City in your top 5. No English teams for me. I think the
No
Champions
English.
League the
So
last
who would
couple
be
of
your top
years
five?
has been a good reflection, and I would not put an English team in the top 5 in world soccer currently.
Who would be your top 5?
Barcelona,
Yeah.
Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, Juventus, and then it gets a little more difficult. I'd probably consider
Chelsea? Come on.
an Atletico
No.
or a Borussia Dortmund.
Okay.
Or maybe even a Monaco or a PSG before I would put Chelsea
Before
or,
Chelsea?
or any English team for that matter in my top 5.
All right. Well,
That's for currently. You know, things change pretty quickly, especially in
Sure.
the world of soccer, but where we're at right now, England's not good enough, and that's going to pose a problem
how about in the last 10 years?
for the future. The last 10 years, that's a different story.
Well, I want to ask you, how about for the last 10 years, who would be the top 5 teams in the last 10 years? And I'm open. I'm asking anybody. Everybody.
You still have your top 3, your mainstays in Bayern Munich, Barcelona, and Real Madrid. Moving on from that, Juventus for the latter half of
No, not the latter half. You'd
these
have to
last
average
10
out
years,
the last 10 years. They were.
Has
Were they
been
even in the Serie A in the last 10? Like,
a great team. I would probably consider them close to a top 5 team. You probably put a Man U in there.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
been more difficult of late, and Chelsea would probably get pretty good consideration too, and probably be in the top 5.
yeah.
Quick question for you here coming in though from Dylan Zuber. Okay, is he wants to know who was more boring to watch this season, Arsenal or Man U?
I'm just yawning thinking of those two teams playing. I would have to argue that it's Man U, though. I think besides Zlatan and some of his flashes of brilliance, even watching a guy like Martial play on the wing, boring. Rooney, Shrek, boring. But the thing that Arsenal has provided actually is you actually get a little bit of possession football, and even though it's not handled in the best way, especially this season, as Dylan, you mentioned, you still have Sanchez scoring cracker goals. You still have Welbeck on the side. You have a lot of options. I think Man U, the problem with them is that they just have been reliant on this traditional conservative style of football, and it's
And that comes with Jose Mourinho really implementing his style on the
Yeah.
team in this sort of defensive play where
And at
you
the
just
end-
want to counter
At the end of the day, you just don't have the pieces, to have exciting football. I mean, you do, but I don't think they've been, they're not there yet. Obviously, Mourinho stays for another year, and I think it'll be a little bit more fun to watch next year. But the question is, speaking of Arsenal, who's going to be leading them next year?
That's a little more difficult to say. Nick Bornstein commented a little bit earlier on the show asking us yet again if Wenger is out. I've touched on this.
Is he our Arsenal Wenger correspondent?
in
Tune
in past weeks, and the consensus that we've come up here with Kay, I think, is that it's time for Wenger to go. But is he going to go? Probably not until he himself decides to. It's going to be up to him. He, in his post-game interview this last weekend, I believe, he was asked about a manager of football operations or something like that. Essentially, in soccer, what would be the equivalent to a GM in an American sport. And he basically said, "What the heck is that? I've never heard of that. This is Arsenal. I'm the manager. I make personnel and technical decisions." So until the day that he leaves voluntarily, he's staying put. But going back into the last
he's in the
question
right,
that
I
we were
guess.
talking about between Arsenal and Man U, I would agree with you in that Man U was probably the more boring team this season, but for a different reason. And that's because Arsenal was quote-unquote exciting, not because of their play, but because of how much of a disaster they've been. And if you are...
And you are an Arsenal fan.
And I am an Arsenal fan. So, for myself and any other Arsenal fans out there, is probably excruciating. But for the rest of the Premier League, watching Arsenal fail and burn was probably pretty entertaining from afar, especially when they were beating us.
And
So-
Arsenal has been the butt of many jokes. I think people were tuning in for that. Man U, I just don't think people had the expectation of, okay, they're going to win the league this year. Whereas Arsenal, they're running out of excuses. And this is the perfect transition into the Premier League. We were previously talking about the Champions League. How's that table looking? I mean, who's going to end up in the top four, Biggs?
Well, the way it's set up right now, or the way things stand right now, is that it's looking like Chelsea has this thing wrapped up. They actually have a chance to win the Premier League if they get 3 points on Friday.
Against Middlesbrough.
They just played Middlesbrough this last weekend. They got the 3 points against Borough, but this next week they will be playing, I will tell you momentarily, West Brom. So, against West Brom, they have a chance to wrap up the title. We've seen this coming for a long time now, even though Tottenham made it close at the end. But Chelsea's going to finish first. Tottenham are too far ahead. They will finish second and finish above Arsenal for the first time in 22 years. Then things get a little more difficult. The way it's looking, it will probably be Man City coming in third, with Liverpool finishing in fourth. In all likelihood, the way things stand currently. Obviously, Arsenal and Manchester United are still hanging in there. They are not far off, both in 5th and 6th place, respectively. And
there's a chance for them, but only if certain teams fall off.
Arsenal have a game in hand on Man City, who is currently in 4th, and if they were to win that game, they would be 3 points behind Man City. Manchester United is also sitting on 35 games, tied with Manchester City, but they are 4 points back.
And, it'll be interesting that Liverpool is finally back in the Champions League, so good for Klopp. I mean, if it works out that way, they're certainly in a good position to make that.
One more win, and they should probably have their top 4 hopes cemented.
Everyone has always argued, and I think rightfully so, that the Premier League is the most exciting league in the world in terms of world soccer, but is it the best league? So you'll have...
Certainly not.
So who would you argue is the best league? La Liga?
Most likely La Liga. Just the competition and the style of play is better than the Premier League, in my opinion.
Well, what is interesting is I saw a simulation was done by, I believe, Sky Sports, who is a homer for the Premier League. They faced every respective, team in the table versus every respective team in the La Liga table, and it did look like actually La Liga, if the simulation was correct, would win. They would win about 56% of the games that would be played. So it would certainly be close, but I think if you were to line them up head to head, it would actually look like La Liga would be the top team. But obviously, there's only 3, maybe 4 marketable teams in La Liga. You're never going to catch a casual fan here in the U.S. saying they're a casual, Celta Vigo fan. So that's the one tribulation against it. But I certainly actually prefer watching Premier League games because I think of the accessibility in the United States is more so. I can't really find a La Liga channel. Like beIN Sport is really hard to get here. But at the end of the day, I'm a Barcelona fan, so that kind of says how the atmosphere of world soccer is right now. I mean, is it kind of turning into the NBA? Is it more about star power?
Not necessarily. I think it's still about the badge in soccer. It always has been, and that's the way it's going to stay.
I mean, I'd like for it to stay that way. I think if you've ever seen Gold living the dream, the badge on the front is more important than the name on the back.
So with that, we have the top 4 in the Premier League. Moving down the table a little bit to the potential relegation teams, or actually 2 confirmed relegation teams. Sunderland and Middlesbrough will be headed back to the English League Championship this next year. Sunderland for the first time in 10 years. That last spot, though, very much up for grabs. Swansea have pulled themselves out of the relegation zone for now with their latest victory over Everton, which was huge for them. But with 2 games left, Swansea sit 1 point above Hull City for that final relegation spot. Who do you think's going down, okay?
I think Swansea, as you mentioned, had a good outing against Everton, and I think that is huge for morale. So unfortunately, we will have to say goodbye to Hull, in my opinion, Hull City. One thing I wanted to ask you about, Bix, is as it will end up now, Leicester City are in 9th place. They are a Bix and K favorite here. And it will likely end up that they end in the top 10, either 10th, 9th, or 8th. Do you consider that a moderate success for the club, or where do you stand on Leicester being where they are right now after last season?
I don't know that it's much of anything at this point, and I think that's what most of us expected it to be. This is who Leicester are. They're a natural.
I mean, are they a top 10 team? I think
somewhere middle, currently overachieving team that's probably at its best. Besides its freak year, a middle-of-the-road team that in a couple years we could potentially see get relegated again. So I think this is what's expected for them, and I guess you could consider it a victory for them to have gotten so far clear of the relegation zone because they were struggling so much earlier this season. So that in and of itself is a victory, but this is who Leicester are, at least for the next couple of years. It's no surprise. Yeah,
it's true, and they'll always have last season, and will always, as sports fans, have last season. One of the, we were reflecting on it last year at this time because they had already won it at this point. That was huge.
And now looking at these last two potential teams that we were just talking about for relegation, their schedules are interesting. As we mentioned, Swansea is 1 point up on Hull City, and it's looking like that's the way it's going to stay because the last two games for Hull City are against Crystal Palace, a game they could win.
Yeah, they could win.
So,
but it isn't.
You're looking at potentially
Crystal Palace.
Potentially 3 points there.
Yeah,
potentially.
Sure.
But then they get Tottenham,
and that's
weirder things have happened. But you have to think that they drop points there. And so Swansea gets the bottom feeders of the league, Sunderland, in their next game. And then they get West Brom. Two teams that they could potentially, and maybe you could argue should, beat.
Yes. Well, here's one thing. And like I mentioned earlier, that showing against Everton brought them a lot of morale. So those teams are very easily beatable. Getting it done against Tottenham on the other side of the ball for Hull City, very hard because Tottenham are in a position to secure a Europe spot, and they need that spot, and they'll need a victory in order to get that spot, especially with certain teams kind of rising up the ranks. So that's why I stick to my guns. I think Swansea stays in the Premier League, and Hull City's in the Championship. And on the who's going to be promoted on that side?
Speaking of, the two teams that have won automatic promotion into the Premier League are Newcastle and Brighton Hove Albion. Brighton led the English League Championship by 7 points with 3 games to go and lost 2 of their last 3 and drew 1. And with Newcastle winning out, they overtook Brighton by 1 point, wound up actually winning the league. So regardless, we will welcome both of those teams back up into the Premier League for the next season. It remains to be seen who the last spot will be. It will be either Reading, Sheffield Wednesday, Huddersfield, or Fulham. And we look forward to an exciting playoff between those 4 teams for that last spot.
It's always good to see Newcastle back in the Premier League. I think they always fit there. One thing I do want to mention is I will be cheering for Fulham because I like to see them there in the Premier League. It just feels right.
A great South London team to rival Chelsea.
Absolutely. Now, looking at La Liga, it looks like Barcelona and Real Madrid are tied for the top at 94 points, although Barcelona has a match up on Real Madrid. So if Real Madrid can win their next fixture, then they will be able to take the lead by 3 points. And looking at third, Atletico Madrid sitting there as they always usually are, with 36 matches played and only 74 points. So I think they're well clear of winning the La Liga this year, and it will be another 2-horse race with Barca, the Catalan Giants, and Madrid, the Capital Giants. Who do you think takes that one?
This one is more difficult because both of these teams, Barcelona and Real Madrid, should unquestionably win out the rest of their games. The way both teams have been playing, though, recently, you just never know what could happen. And Real Madrid have the advantage on points right now as they have one more game in hand. If they get any sort of points out of their next game, they take the lead over Barcelona. The thing with that is, if Real Madrid were to lose and stay tied on points with Barcelona, that would give the boys from Catalan the lead, actually, and vault them into first in La Liga on goal difference. That they lead by, it looks like 17 goals, which is huge.
It is huge. And another thing to realize is that, we just talked about this earlier, all of the resources can be allocated towards the domestic league for Barcelona as they are not in the Champions League. That'll be huge in terms of rest, in terms of mindset. They as in Madrid, Real Madrid will be playing the game tomorrow, a midweek game, a full 90-minute game, obviously, at night. And while this will all be happening while Barcelona players will be just resting for the following fixture on either Saturday or Sunday. So a huge factor, I believe, going into the rest of the La Liga table. Now, obviously, if you're a Real Madrid fan, I mean, the case should be said that you would want both the La Liga title and the Champions League trophy. But if you close your eyes and really picture which one you really want, I would say it's the Champions League trophy, right?
I'm not so sure.
Okay.
Because those Real Madrid fans do love to win the league and beat their foes in Barcelona, so that'd be a difficult conversation to have. But what's fascinating about this is there is still a scenario in which both Barca or Real Madrid come out with, respectively, 2 trophies. Because Barcelona is out of the Champions League. Real Madrid has a chance to win that competition. Both of them are still in play for La Liga, and Barcelona gets Alaves in the Copa del Rey final.
Yeah.
So presuming Barcelona wins that, they've got 1 trophy. If they were able to steal La Liga from under the noses of their rivals, that would be 2. Sure. And if Madrid can't pull out the Champions League victory, in a season where they make the Champions League final, presumably, and are in the league competition up until the very last day, they could come away with nothing.
Well, in fairness to them, I believe Madrid has the Club World Cup that they won this year.
They do, but when you talk about the big 3, this is it.
That's a good point. I would obviously, as a Barcelona fan, I would hope that that's the case. It should be fun. We're gonna have a couple more weeks left in the season. I think 3 at most, and then the Champions League will close out this regular season for another fun and exciting time in world soccer. Not as exciting as last year, I would argue. But now I want to switch over to, I can't believe it's taken us this long to talk about, the NHL playoffs, because we are running a little low on time here. And it's something that we need to give respect to because the Stanley Cup playoffs are happening. I am all in on the NHL postseason, and for good reason, as my Predators have now advanced to the 3rd round and are now the Stanley Cup, not just the Western Conference, the Stanley Cup favorites. That's huge. That has never happened in Nashville before. I'm all in on it. We have a lot of Nashville people joining us on Facebook. We had earlier in the show. A lot of people around the world are all in on the Predators. And it's been a fun one all around. I mean, they were the first team to advance, and there's still 3 really good series going on. Why don't you fill us in on that?
The interesting thing about the NHL playoffs is that, at least in my opinion, it's almost more exciting than the NBA playoffs at this point, because you look at the entire playoffs as a whole. We'll get into specific matchups in a minute, but the playoffs as a whole, there have been 2 series, the entire playoffs, that have been clean sweeps, 4-0, both first round series, and most teams since then have won at least one, if not two games. And in this in this second round of the playoffs, every team has won at least two games.
Well, sorry, I want to argue that one of those two sweeps were by the Predators, who were a wild card. So you couldn't even compartmentalize that as a quote unquote boring series, because
exactly
it was an upset,
taking down a 1 seed.
Yeah.
So
there was only really one sweep.
At this point in the bracket, you have Nashville recently getting its fourth and final win over the St. Louis Blues, winning that series 4-2 and earning a berth in the Western Conference Finals. And that's the only team that's through to the next round so far. You look at the other series that are going on, the Anaheim Ducks and the Edmonton Oilers tied at 3-3. Been a great series so far, back and forth. You go across to the East. Washington Capitals storming back from a 3-1 deficit to even that series at 3-3 against the Pittsburgh Penguins. Who knows what could happen there? And then you have a third series potentially if the New York Rangers were able to win Game 6, maybe going to a Game 7.
Yeah, and what's really funny is one of the things I mentioned in our pre-show and our breakdown was. Our rundown was that a lot of small markets are essentially dominating this time of the year. So, I mean, you had Nashville and St. Louis, not necessarily the biggest markets. Obviously, New York is in play, as well as DC. But Anaheim. If you are one of the people that considers it part of LA, then that's a big market. But if you're one of the people that are smart and have driven from Anaheim to LA, you realize they're two different cities. That's a small market. Edmonton, a small market. I believe Ottawa, not big on Canadian geography, small market. So that just leaves New York and D.C. I mean, Pittsburgh is, I guess, a big market in terms of sports. But, a lot of fervent fan bases that don't get a chance to show out because they're part of big market teams, small market teams, are now having the time that they deserve in the spotlight.
And so far, our predictions are still intact. Nothing has been ruined from what we talked about last week. We both had the Nashville Predators moving on. It'll be interesting to see what happens with a couple of these Game 7s. I know I had the Oilers, you've got the Ducks.
Yeah, and also I will mention that if the Ducks win, then I'm going to Anaheim for a game, so I'm really rooting for them. And I'm not going to Edmonton.
And I've got the Penguins. I believe you had the Capitals, correct?
I had the Capitals, yeah.
And then I believe we both had the Senators, but still, it's been highly competitive.
Yeah.
And really, really fun to watch.
It's been really fun. And also, first of all, I want to talk about this Capitals-Penguins game. Actually, not first of all, but additionally, I want to talk about this Capitals-Penguins series because the Penguins were up 3-1. And the Washington Capitals have now forced a Game 7. And I think, if I'm not wrong, I think the Capitals get to host that. So DC will be going crazy. And, the Capitals always sort of crap out early on, and they have been able to respond to their criticisms and maybe, hopefully for them, go and advance onto the Eastern Conference Finals. I'm cheering on them, and I hope they meet Ottawa because that was my pick as well. But who do you like in that Capitals-Penguins Game 7?
I have to stick to my guns. I'm staying with the Penguins. I know it's been difficult for them trying to close out this series, even though they've gotten Sidney Crosby back. But there's something about these two teams. The Penguins find a way to get it done. They have for the last couple of years, and I think they do it again.
Well, yeah, you're right. They got back Sidney Crosby, but the Capitals are in prime position out of all of the years that they've played. Recently, at least in the last 6 years, to finally make a push. They've always lost in the first or second round. I think this is their true time to shine. I mean, they've forced a Game 7. If they can come back, then the Penguins will be added on to the list of recent victims to the 3-1 lead loss. And I'm really rooting for that. I root for good narrative, and I'm doing that in Washington. So that'll be a fun one. And then going back to the Ducks-Oilers game, who do you like in that one?
Again, sticking to my guns. Got to go with the Oilers. They got the Game 6 win I believe the score was 7-1, so they're coming in hot. And, I believe the game will be in Anaheim, but still, gives the Oilers more to prove. They're taking Game 7.
We'll have to see about that. But, again, I'm really, really rooting for the Anaheim Ducks because, that's just an hour drive away. I will definitely, no matter how much it costs, I will definitely allocate some funds and go to a Predators game in Anaheim.
Which leads us into our last series that is still currently going on, and in a little bit less than an hour, Game 6, they will drop the puck, and that is Ottawa and New York. Ottawa currently leads 3-2.
Yeah, so Ottawa has a chance to, tonight move on and find out who they will face. You could argue that, even though the Predators are rightfully the Stanley Cup favorites, beyond that, the Capitals and the Penguins are both two of the best teams in the NHL. So whoever gets to face them will have a challenge in front of them. Hoping it's Ottawa because, they'll get a little bit of rest for that series if they win tonight. But also I love good narratives, as I've mentioned, and I'd love for New York to force a Game 7.
It would be great if they forced a Game 7. It's not often that three of the four series would have gone to 7 games.
And even the Predators Blues game, I mean, it went to 6. It wasn't a boring series at all. So really fun time in the NHL playoffs.
And remind us who you've got winning it all, okay?
I was hesitant, because the Predators were still a wild card. They still are coming out of a wild card spot. But now they're favorites, so I don't know if I can change my pick from the Capitals to the Predators. But it's looking like a good pick, man. I'm all in. I'm all in on Smashville.
It's the kind of thing that it's not quite on the level of Leicester City.
I was about to say that, but it's still
you root for these underdogs, especially when you're in a position like myself where your team's already been knocked out, and you just want to see some good games and some exciting hockey.
Who did they lose to?
The San Jose Sharks.
Yeah,
they lost early on to the Oilers in a game that went to. In a series that went to 6 games.
So if the Oilers, win that series, you'd want to root for Nashville because to avenge your loss. All I'm saying is you can't really hate the Nashville Predators. They are a fun team to love. They're a fun team to get behind. I'm not even the biggest hockey guy, but I've bowed down to the people who have kept convincing me to watch hockey. I've watched it. I've loved it. I'm all in. Let's do this thing.
Well, let me ask you this.
Sure.
What have you watched more of?
Mm-hmm.
The NHL playoffs up to this point, or the NBA playoffs?
Well, I've watched the NBA playoffs because I'm not going to act like I'm a huge, suddenly, hockey fan. I'm a Predators fan, and I've watched every Predators game religiously. But I've watched pretty much every NBA game. 1, because of accessibility. 2, because I know the people who are playing. 3, because, I'm sorry, but it's hard to watch hockey on TV. I can never see when there's a goal. I'm not going to lie to you. I have to watch 3 replays to find out if it's a goal or not. I know when the basket goes into the hoop. I like the NBA full and foremost, but I'm all in on playoff hockey.
I love it when the basket goes into the hoop.
The ball goes in the hoop, man. Fire me, ESPN.
The interesting thing about that is, although, again, I'm probably one of those people that has jumped on the hockey bandwagon the last couple of years and probably paid more attention when we actually get to the playoffs, I've absolutely watched more of the NHL playoffs than the NBA playoffs. And maybe that's just because in my case particularly, it's more difficult for me to get access to NBA games because they're usually on TNT and whatnot. And
hold on. Are you...
As a college student, I don't have access to those channels.
So for the NHL, you're going to USA and you're going to
I'm going to NBC. I'm going to NBCSN.
Oh, you're going on the online
to watch those games because I get those for free.
TNT has an online service. It's really easy.
That I did not know.
Dude,
so
it's super easy.
I'll have to check it out. But I like NBC's broadcast, and I do actually enjoy watching hockey, even though it's still difficult to track the puck, like you say. But it's so intense and so exciting at every point in the game, whereas the NBA, I feel like I can tune out for 3 quarters and then check back in at the beginning of the 4th. If the game's close, I'll give it a watch.
Well, here's my problem with the NBA is, now all it is, okay, we're going to drive into the hoop, we're going to get a foul, we're going to shoot a couple free throws, and that's it. I'm openly a critic of some of the modern NBA techniques because it's gotten a little boring to watch. On the NHL side, I want to ask you this as a very casual fan. What is your thought on them doing basically like 2 halftimes, where they have 3 periods? Do you like that? Do you not like that?
It's a little difficult because
Not 2 halftimes, but like 2 major breaks.
You will lose some people during those breaks, but there's not really much you can do about that. It's necessary when you look at what these guys are doing out on the ice for 20 minutes at a time. You need that sort of break,
Sure.
Because they're going for 20 minutes as hard as they can, and they deserve that little bit of time off. So it makes for a longer product that you have to plan for and watch, but at the end of the day, it doesn't deter me from watching all that much, and it's interesting. You get to see the highlights, and that way, especially as a more casual fan, you get to hear some analysis and you get to see the highlights, and people will explain what's going on, so then you process what's just happened and you begin to understand it more and more.
All right. Well, that's good. And like you said, you like the NBC crew over there. I don't mind them. I've had some problems with them. I've critiqued them in the past, but I like sticking to my NBA coverage because it's really easy for me to watch TNT and ESPN. They're like 2 channels away from each other. But it is almost 3:50. I want to start rapid fire a little early today. Are you cool with that? We can get into everything.
Works with me.
All right. The first question I want to ask you is going back to the NBA playoffs. We didn't really get a chance to dive into this too much, but where do you see Kyle Lowry, now that he's going to opt out of his contract, end up?
That is going to be one of the most interesting questions that we look for in the NBA this offseason, because Kyle Lowry has come out and said he wants to chase a ring. That's what he's all about. That's what most people want to do when they hit free agency. And you have to think that's going to be not in Toronto. So this is still a player that commands a whole lot of money, and he's going to have to find someone to pay him. But it's hard right now to find him a great fit elsewhere when you think about the rest of the league.
Hot take. I know, Helene, you've been mad at me for saying hot take so much on this show, but hot take. This is a hot take. Tony Parker's replacement in San Antonio.
I like the idea. I almost went elsewhere in Texas and said, why don't the Houston Rockets bring him in?
Because they already have a point guard.
Yeah, but Kyle Lowry's an upgrade.
From James Harden?
Move Harden back to a shooting guard.
No, I can't do that. That's why they've been so successful in the D'Antoni system. I like the thought of it, but you're wrong. I think it's
a good fit.
It's an interesting fit, but I want to see what they do with DeMar DeRozan. Do they give him a max contract? Do they, are they bought into DeMar DeRozan as the Raptors' front man?
Or do they blow things up and go a different route and
get Porzingis?
go a different way than what we've seen the last couple of years with DeRozan and Lowry, obviously, as he's going to be leaving. But I do like a fit for Lowry somewhere in Texas. I think the Spurs would actually be a very good spot for him.
Cool. Yeah.
For you, I have a little question about soccer, and that is going to Ligue 1 a little bit, the French soccer league. Do you think Monaco has things wrapped up at the top, dethroning PSG for the first time in a couple of years?
Well, so just to recap, Monaco has 3 points on PSG, as well as a game on them. They've only played 35. PSG and most of the rest of the league have played 36. So I would say that Monaco have probably the best shot as of recently to lock that up. I want to mention, I don't know if you remember a few years ago when Radamel Falcao was at the top of his game, and he was kind of the hot shot, and he made a surprise move to Monaco, and everyone was kind of making fun of him and saying, you're just chasing the money. Well, now look at them. I mean, they were in the Champions League semifinal. They're winning the league. Do you think Falcao has a big, position to do with that? Or
he really does, and he's played great. He and Kylian Mbappe up at the top, leading that attacking front, have been incredible together. And I think that's attributable to a lot of the success that they've had this season.
It certainly is. And so I'm going to say that I think PSG still obviously win the last 2 games, but it won't be enough. Monaco is going to want to win something this year as they came so close in the Champions League. So congratulations, Monaco. You are the league champions.
All right. You got the next question for
definitely.
me.
I want to ask you about the MLB. This isn't something that we got to talk to in depth today, but the New York Yankees have been playing really well. They've, towards the early part of the season, it still is the early part of the season, but, we were saying, they're off to a hot start. It'll probably die down. They had that giant, I can't remember his name, Aaron Judge or something like that.
Aaron Judge, yes.
Yeah.
Currently tied for the league lead in home runs with 13.
And also he's like 6'7", 300 pounds, something crazy like that. But they're winning a lot of their games. I believe they're like 21-9. They're doing really well. Do you think people should start buying into what the Yankees are preaching?
At this point, it's a little early to tell. They're very talented, and certainly it's going to take still a couple more weeks for us to figure out where the Yankees really fit into this playoff race, because their pitching is still not where it needs to be. They have a great bullpen at this point, but their starting pitching up in the air. Guys like CC Sabathia, Michael Pineda, Luis Severino, they've started well this season, but historically the last couple of years they have not been able to maintain things that well. And same thing with Masahiro Tanaka. He needs to be up to his game every time he goes out on the mound if the Yankees want to keep winning. And then also, they have a talented roster, and they fielded a great team this year, but they need consistency. I look towards the middle of July, middle of August, when you really get down into the gritty moments of the season, and at that point, is a guy like Starlin Castro, like Didi Gregorius, like Chase Headley, like Chris Carter, are those guys still going to be providing the Yankees with the same sort of output that they are right now? I don't know what the answer to that question is yet, but in a couple weeks I think we'll have a little more of a feel for how and where this team's headed, and then we'll be able to make a decision a little bit better. But the way they've started things off, they look great, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them in the playoffs this year.
Very cool. I think whenever the Yankees are involved, the MLB is always a better product. Especially that the Chicago Cubs are still going to be in the forefront of MLB news. I'm excited for the rest of the season.
Going back to the NHL playoffs for a minute here, which series are you most excited to see finish out of the 3 that are still ongoing in this round? And who do you think is the player that ultimately makes the difference in that series for the winning team?
I'm going to have to stick with I really want to see how the Ducks and the Oilers play out, but I'm going to have to stick with the Capitals and the Penguins, because I think that's the more interesting series. And I think, with Sidney Crosby coming back, he is a big reason as to why they have a fighting chance, even though the Capitals, with their dynamic depth that they have, will have a good shot to kind of, like I said, add the Penguins to that 3-1 lead loss group of people, including the Warriors, the Cleveland Indians. The Penguins will be up there. So, I'm excited to see how that one plays out. I think we'll have that game tomorrow.
I believe so.
Yeah. But again, all in on playoff hockey. I love it. I like it a lot. So my question has to do with a little bit of San Diego news, actually. So I don't know if you heard this, but in just the 3rd time in its 15-year history, or 11-year history, something like that, Petco Park was rained out on Sunday. So it was a rainy day here in San Diego, but just for the 3rd time they played almost 100 games a season.
81.
81. I guess we haven't been in the postseason for a while. Just trying to count that.
Yeah.
So 80 games a season, 81 games a season for the last 10 seasons, almost 800 games, or maybe a little more. Just the 3rd time it's been rained out. So my question is, Besides AT&T Park, which I know you're a Giants fan, you love that park, is Petco Park the best park destination on the West Coast? That's a very specific question, but I don't want to count Fenway. Or
I
any
think
of those
so,
guys.
and I'd argue in terms of how nice and well built and just
Accessible.
overall accessible the stadium is. It's probably, I mean, at least easily in the top 5 in terms of all major league stadiums. Petco Park is beautiful. It's a shame the team hasn't been performing the last couple of years, especially.
Give me your top 5 after you're done.
I would absolutely consider it in the top 5 for stadiums in my opinion across the country.
Top 5 parks.
Now my top 5 parks. Top 5 parks in terms of how nice they are. Traditionally, what the coolest place to go see a game would be.
Yeah, I mean, give me a weighted average of all of those factors.
It's a little bit difficult of a question because I have only been to a couple. Obviously, I haven't been to all 30 stadiums, but in my opinion, I know I'm a Giants fan, but it's really hard to beat AT&T Park. That's my number 1. Always will be. Petco is really nice. I love it. It's clean. It's great. We love going to catch games there whenever we can. I'd love to see a game at Wrigley Field one day. Just the history surrounding that. Same goes for Fenway Park. That would be awesome to go see. And beyond that, it comes down to your preferences and where you want to see a game. I'd love to go sit up in the Crawford boxes and see a game in Houston.
Yankee Stadium.
Watch an Astro game. Yankee Stadium would be great. It's lost a little bit of its allure since it's not the Yankee Stadium anymore. Having just torn down the old one that held all of the pinstripe history. But those would be a couple of my favorite places to go catch a game.
Before you answer your question, I'm going to say the wild card for best baseball park, the Rogers Center in Toronto. I love it. I've seen a game there. It's fantastic.
That would actually be really cool to go catch a game up north as well.
Yep.
All right, another question for you, Kay, is what do you make of this whole Kelly Olynyk deal? Is he a dirty player? Are things being blown out of proportion? As a Warriors fan, I didn't like Draymond coming out with and saying what he did. But what do you make of all this?
Draymond gonna Draymond. I think Kelly Olynyk is a non-factor. I don't think we want to make him into a dirty player. I don't think he has the right to that. I think that just shows how soft the NBA is that we've made such a big deal out of this. Earlier in the show, I was just saying that, that was an incident that happened, and it kind of showed that his passion for it and him being involved in such a situation like that. Although I would say that it wasn't a dirty move, and also I think it was initiated by Kelly Oubre in the first place. So yeah,
all right.
I don't know. I think he's a good piece for the Boston Celtics, though.
And with that is going to wrap up our show this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to tune in next week for Kay's last show ever as he is graduating. Thank you so much again for listening. This has been your favorite sports radio talk show, Bix and Kay. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you, guys. Last show next week. Bye.